Thaddeus Cray Productions presents a no-sleep story by the author, DarklyGathers. I've been stalking a monster I've nicknamed the Wheel, and it's unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. I've been watching the Wheel for a month now. That's the name I've given this monstrosity. The Wheel. I saw it for the first time on one of my night walks with my dog, Benny. Beyond the edge of town, out down by the fields and the forest, it was hard to see at the beginning. In the darkness, I mistook its body for a fallen tree at the edge of the woods. Benny noticed it before me, anyway. Or felt it, at least. He stopped and stiffened, tensed and focused. Benny made the mistake of investigating the nest of a hive of yellow-jacket wasps once. He got an awful sting on his nose. He developed a hatred of anything even slightly resembling that nest that we find in our travels. His reaction here made me first think that he had found some such object. "What is it, boy?" I murmured to him. But he wasn't looking down at the ground. He was staring right out into the field, growling something from the back of his throat. I remember this feeling of cold just slithering sickly over my skin. I remember crouching by the hedge and peering through, looking out on the farmland and following his gaze at what I first thought was this fallen tree, stuck in the ground at an unusual angle, with branches outstretched and overlapping. I remember a feeling of terrible, icy dread drop like a stone on my stomach as the fallen tree shifted and adjusted its branches on that cool, windless night. My eyes grew used to the darkness, and the moon drifted out from behind a cloud, and the thing was washed in a faint, silvery light. I could see it a little clearer. Massive, you must understand, the size of an elephant, I guess, though far more scrawny and spindly. I still shiver thinking about it that first time, watching it rising up on all fours. It sickened me then as it does now. Even before I knew what it was capable of, I didn't dare speak, but I kept a warning hand on the back of Benny's neck. Stay, boy, stay low and stay quiet. How to describe the Wheel's body? Picture the werewolf, if you can, from Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. My nephew loves that movie. Bizarre reference, perhaps, but that's the best way I could think to describe it. Large, hunched, and hairless. Stretched over animalistic bones, though more metallic looking. I don't know, rusty, almost. And his head. The creature's head. Its namesake. The monster's head is scarcely a head at all. Imagine, if you will, a huge, layered wheel. Again, metal-looking and ringed, with dozens of minuscule little amber lights. Benny and I watched as the creature crept through the night to edge of the farmland. We watched as it leant back on its haunches with a low creak, and it looked up to the nearest tree, a pine, I think. We watched as the great wheel head began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, with a sound like a rising wind, wheel and wheel, and rotate round and round, till there were nothing more than a blur. The light that ringed itself burst into a fiery intensity, and the pine tree found itself caught in a beam of brightening orange light. I stared in confusion and awe, heart pounding as the tree began to grow rapidly, right before my eyes. And up it went, up into the air, the branches creaking and cracking with duress as they sprouted with surprise from the sides of the trunk, as the pine needles burst from their ends and fell to the floor. In a constant rain, ever growing and ever falling, and still the tree climbed taller. Up, up it went, far up beyond its brothers. The tree's groans and cracks grew louder and louder, but the wheel scarcely adjusted its position. I remember watching the monster's ribs shift, its silver stomach bulge, as its head span round and around. The tree grew upward for about a minute before it grew no further, and not long after that, the needles stopped falling too. No new leaves were grown, and the wood began to rot, and the bark began to split, though still the wheel held the tree in its gaze. The branches drooped and dropped from the trunk. The tree began to stoop and waver, groaning under the stress, until at last its roots gave out, and it tumbled to the side, crashing loudly into its neighbor, and resting there, dead, as its base began rotting away. Only then did the wheel's head begin to slow, the lights dimmed, and the creature took a measured, careful step back. It waited, perhaps a moment or two more, for the spinning to cease, and then the lights to fade. That was it. I watched it look around, and bound across fields on heavy feet, disappearing into the shadows at the edge of the forest. That was all it took. All it took for me to become obsessed. Obsessed with the beast. How could I not be? Benny always knew where to go. He seemed to sense which of our walks would be wheel hunting walks beforehand. His whole demeanor was always totally different. He's normally such a happy and carefree guy, but the nights we went after the wheel, it's like he could sense their importance. So just under a week after this first incident, and several sleepless nights spent attending fruitless research, we found the creature again, Benny and I, a few miles south of his previous spot, at the edge of a field filled with sheep. The moon was not so bright that night. The air was still at first, but I still recall the sudden fright I felt at seeing the shadowed rim of the wheel rise up from the ditch at the edge of the field, merged for a second with the shadows of the broken wooden fence, then, climbing up and above, clambering over and into the night, his limbs long, that circle of light, brightening, slowly, beginning to spin. Then faster, then faster. It's all right, Benny. Stay low, boy, I murmured, in a wavering voice as we watched, crouched from our position nearby. Most of the sheep awoke and fled, bleating as they bounced clumsily across the field. But one poor creature did not. Caught in the beam of the wheel's brightening light and frozen in place, we could only watch as the light grew stronger still, as the wheel span faster and faster, and the monster drew hungrily closer. We watched as the wool began to burst from the sheep's body, graying and billowing out, as the creature's ears began to droop, as horns grew out from his head at an impossible rate. We watched as the sheep was enveloped in its own wool and eventually collapsed to the ground. Down into the dead grass it fell as a pile of wool and bones. And only when it was little more than dust did the wheel pull back and allow the spinning of its head to slow. I ducked instinctively as it seemed to pass its gaze over our position in the shrubbery. It's difficult to tell where the creature is looking. The only clue is that circle of lights. It didn't come after us, though. It seemed to enjoy the sheep more than the tree, as it went after 3 more that night, before disappearing. It came back the next night, too, and took some more, though on the 3rd night, I found myself warned away by an angry farmer, 2 of his vehicles positioned in the field with floodlights blaring. Benny and I didn't see the wheel that night, or the night after that. Then again, at the end of the week, Benny caught the wheel's scent yet again, All our walks were in pursuit of the wheel by this point. I was losing sleep over the monstrosity, but I had to see it again. Get some proper footage or something. My phone doesn't record so well in the dark, but I have an old camera that might do the trick. I swear it had a setting specifically for night. So out we went, out into the night. We didn't leave the town this time, just to the outskirts. We walk for the better part of an hour and pass a homeless man leant against the side of a building, bare feet stretched over the cobblestone, as the drizzle began to patter all around us. "Evening," he nods to me, and I nod back. I pause at the sound of a noise from the far end of the street. It's only a group of kids, teenagers I guess, drunk and stumbling home from one of the local bars. Benny stops beside me too, though, fur risen and ears pinned back. The homeless man seems to notice. "Not a bad group of lads, you know," he chuckles. "They often have money left over at this kind of time, so I'm still awake, after all. Nothing to be afraid of. In fact..." "Quiet," I hiss at him all of a sudden. And then, "Sorry, but please, shh." He raises an eyebrow at me, but does as I say, as I suddenly drop to the ground, peering out from the street behind a nearby bin. "The fuck?" he mutters, following my gaze as the lads shout and laugh their way up the street. Behind them, clambering down the side of a building in the rain, is the wheel. Avoiding the direct glare of the street lamps, it seems to creep its way over the road like an enormous spider, watching its prey down below. "I'm telling you, mate, I could have fucked her," one of the guys blurts out as his friend starts laughing. His speech is slurred, and one of them still carries a bottle in his hand. "Boyfriend, mate. Didn't you see that guy at the bar?" Another manages to choke out through laughter, though the laughing stops the moment the wheel's shadow falls long and dark across the stones and puddles before them. "What the..." The sound of the wheel's spin raises, swiftly and suddenly like a wind. The head of the beast becomes a quick blur, and the lights around the rim begin to brighten. The lad looks up. "Jesus fuck Christ!" In a frenzied panic, they start stumbling and staggering in different directions off the road. Chaos sets in. I can feel the tension of both my dog and the homeless man tighten beside me. The shock and the disbelief. The sheer disbelief. I remember what I'm here for and start fumbling with my camera. "Johnny!" One of the lads shouts above the sound of the wheel and the wash of the rain. But the boy in the middle, the one with the bottle, is caught in the center of the road in the amber glare of the creature's beam. His eyes are bright and terrified with the light's reflection, and with mouth open. It looks as if a scream is caught in his throat. "Help me!" he stutters before his jaw is locked in place. I struggle with the camera. "We gotta help him," the man beside me stutters, hand on my shoulder. But what could we do? What is there to do? One of the boy's mates sprints off into the night. The other shouts and panics. Hands on his head, but the wheel has its prize. I watch as the lights brighten and the wheel spins faster. As the boy grows a little taller and fills out, I watch his hair burst from his head, and I watch its creases and wrinkles appear on his face. The skin on his arms start to loosen, and the hair of his color begins to gray. His jaw trembles. He looks as if he's trying to speak, as a tear rolls down the side of his face. The crow's feet aside his eyes deepen and darken as he is forced to stoop as the rain falls. "Sir, please, what can we do?" the homeless man hisses, shaking me, but I don't respond. There's nothing we can do. We can't help this boy now. A sob escapes the victim's throat, caught in the sound of the rushing wind, and he closes his eyes one final time. His friends have all gone now. I don't know where to. Watch as he exhales and collapses to the ground with a crunch, and still the wheel draws his energy, his body convulsing and twitching until he has crumbled to a skeleton, and then, as with the sheep, to dust, already washing away across the stone in the rain. The lights of the wheel start to fade. Its spinning slows, and the targeting beam fades away. Silence before the gentle patter of the rain. Then a ding proudly proclaims a digital jingle loud enough in the strained tension of the street. Too loud, actually. Far too loud. Benny jumps at the sound, and he's not the only one. My utter horror, the wheel, still balanced between buildings and perched above the street, swings round his monstrous head right towards our position, and with a terrible creak, the lights reignite. Fuck! I yell. Benny barks. The homeless man swears and staggers up against the wall, splashing in a puddle that has formed behind us. Terror strikes me. Run! I shout, and with Benny at my heels, we run down the street and race around the corner, sending great splashes as we do. Help! Wait! The homeless man cries out from behind me. As I round the corner, I shoot a look back over my shoulder. I watch in horror as he falls to the ground and thuds against the stones with a grunt. I watch as he is caught in the beam. His eyes meet mine, and I hear that terrible whirring, both eerily metallic and yet natural at the same time. The rising wind. I see the shadow of the beast creep into position from round the corner. Don't leave me, mate, the man screams in a hoarse voice. But it is already too late. He reaches out a hand to try and lift himself above the ground. And then, suddenly, he freezes. The air above and around him shimmers in orange. I watch as he starts to shale, as his eyes roll back and a tooth loosens from his gums, falling to the stones with a clatter. His fingernails lengthen. His hands become wrinkled and spotted. I'm sorry, Gemma, he whispers, before his lips crack still. Moth flutters into the beam and disappears before my eyes, into powder. Benny is barking. I become aware that I have stopped running. I am standing and staring aghast as the man on the ground takes his final ragged breaths. Benny bites at my sleeve and pulls, and the spell is broken. I watch as the man dissolves into bones with a quick, sad sigh. I turn tail and run, running through the streets, round corner after corner, as far away from the wheel as we can, heading roughly back in the direction of the house. Back to my lane, back inside, slamming the door shut tight. I collapse against it, falling to the floor with my head in my hands. I hope you enjoyed part 1 of The Wheel by the NoSleep author, DarklyGathers. Part 2 will be coming out pretty soon. For right now, I hope you enjoy this. You guys be blessed, and we'll see you.